And welcome back to the first segment of our show this morning. We have been joined on the set by CEO Jose Alpuche of the Ministry of Agriculture. Good morning, CEO.
Good morning.
We're also joined this morning by Dr. Victorillano Pascual. He's the Coordinator for Water Management and Climate Change at the Ministry of Agriculture.
Good morning.
Good morning,
Good
gentlemen.
morning.
The topic this morning is, of course, the response of the Ministry of Agriculture to the ongoing drought situation in Belize and any other related developments.
Yeah.
Let's begin by talking about what you guys have been able to observe in certain parts of the country that are affected by the ongoing drought.
Good morning, and thanks for having us on. Good morning, Belize. At the moment, it's 4 of the 6 districts that are being impacted by the drought, the northern 2 and the central 2. Toledo and the Stann Creek district appears to be faring relatively well. The first thing we have to consider is that we're still in the event.
Yeah.
The National Met Service suggests or predicts that this will go through all the way into October. So we're doing preliminary assessments as it is right now, but it would not give you the full picture of what the total impact will be because it's still ongoing. Equally to what we see in terms of damages for areas like livestock, we will see that well into next year, depending on how pastures recover. So we may very well have a carryover of this event well into next year, impacting more than just crops and crop. We are monitoring it very, very closely, and we're preparing to make recommendations to government as to what needs to be done or what we would suggest be done to help alleviate the problems.
What classifies this current event as a drought?
Lack of rainfall.
I know, but how much below normal is it?
Well, basically we're far, I cannot give you a specific figure, but we're way beyond the actual normal rainfall. Basically, if I can continue from where CEO started, whenever we talk about agriculture, we're basically talking about food production and our security.
Yeah.
And we should realize that both production and security right now is being compromised by the effects of the changing environment, climate change, so to speak. So what we are doing within the ministry, we're starting to ensure that we start to plan properly because planning is important.
Yes.
We need to adapt, use precise data in order for us to make informed decisions. So that's the method, that's the way that we're going right now.
Yeah. Now, the reason I asked that is because I think it was last year as well, there was a drought, perhaps not as severe as it is this year.
The last severe one was in 2015, that was the...
So it seems to be more an annual event of less rainfall than perhaps a change that is taking place. And I wanted to touch on that because your expertise is in climate change. Is it perhaps that we are just seeing a shift in what we are accustomed to in our seasons?
Marlene, we need to realize that it's bigger than just the shift. We have to bear in mind that we do have, well, Belize is considered a country that have significant amount of water, especially fresh water.
Yes.
Yeah.
But with our increase in population and the removal of our forest cover, that is starting to impact the quality and quantity of water.
Yeah.
Remember that these forests provide some type of microclimate within the environment. And once that is being degraded or cut down, then they start to have these changes in microclimate within the different areas of the country. So we need to start taking and looking at paying keen attention to these type of changes because we might say, certainly we're having below rainfall within a certain area. But what caused some of these changes? Is it just the rainfall per se, or is it the microclimate, the different forests and so forth that is being affected? We need to start to look at all these information and collect these data, analyze them properly, and by doing that, then we can start making these informed decisions.
So what I'm hearing from you is that while very often when we talk about climate change and some of the shifts that we see we look at what's happening in the rest of the world, but you're saying we need to pay attention to what's happening in our own
within our
backyard.
own backyard, exactly. We need to look at what's happening over in neighboring countries.
Yeah.
They're having the same concern as us. But we can only control what we do within our country.
Of course.
Internally.
Yeah.
We know that we have all our watersheds, or 39 watershed. We have 18 major watershed and 5 transboundary watershed. These are things that we have. But we can only control what we do in Belize. Whatsoever Guatemala do within those watershed, we cannot control. Look at our Belize River. It stems from across Guatemala and come directly through Benque all the way to Belize. Supposingly, they decide to put a dam. What will happen to our Belize River watershed? These are things that we have to start paying attention to and start to see how we can plan and adapt. Because the belief that Belize has an oversupply of fresh water is not true. We're seeing with our increase in population, food production. With increase in population, we will have food production will need to be increased. So that will have a change in our environment again, because if food production needs to increase, then what will happen to our landscape? Right? Industries will start building. It is projected that by 2100 we should move from about 700,000 to 1 million people. So within that time frame, what will we do to start planning for that long term?
Let me ask a question here, and we're going back to what the CEO initially mentioned. When we think of the North being affected, in terms of crops, we're thinking sugar primarily, correct?
Sugar, grains, corn,
Beans.
soybeans, beans.
Okay,
And even vegetable production. You do have San Carlos, Nagobank and other areas that produce quite a bit of vegetables that will also be impacted.
And in the Cayo district, we're looking at areas primarily such as Valley of Peace and those other communities that are
Spanish
providing the
lookout,
agriculture.
grains, it's across, as I said, it's across the board. Nobody's saved from it unless you have irrigation. You can mitigate some of the impact.
The drought that's affecting us currently, in fact, in the rest of the region, they're also experiencing a drought. Belize is more severe, I understand. But if I recall, when in conversation just with the Met Office here, they had warned very early on that we would be experiencing an extended period of dry. So my question to you as the Ministry of Agriculture, if this information was put forward, what was done to be able to work with the agricultural sector on preventative measures so they'd be able to at least mitigate the impact on their stocks?
Alerts come both from the National Met Service, but also too from regional organizations, and that information is passed on to farmers. I also know that they've had the Met Service and the Ministry of actually collaborating in awareness campaign for this. The farmers are fairly well informed of it. Some have planted and lost, expecting that it would rain a bit. You recall a couple months ago we had a short period of rain, so everybody thought, well, it's here, so let's plant. Others waited a little while. So the impact will be definitely from losses from those that actually planted and did not get the yield, but also those that have decided not to plant. While they're not being impacted by investment in the ground being lost, they're losing from lost income in the sense that they will not be producing for a cycle.
What's the current assessment in terms of damage so far?
I really don't want to give a figure because it's very preliminary. Our survey is still being conducted at the moment, and as I said, even an assessment now will be revised as we come to the end of the event.
Now, or coverage in the news has led to, I believe it was the corn and soybean farmers estimating over $2 million in loss for them. And you speak of all the other industries that may be involved. Now, this is an issue that goes beyond the individual farmer's pocket, whether they can pay their debt, whether they'll be recollecting the money that they've invested. It's also talking about food security. And let's look at the long-term implications. I mean, the number will matter. It'll matter for the economy, and it'll matter for the individual families who are involved in the agricultural sector. but there are also further implications for those of us who are simply living in Belize.
The impact will be probably about 10 times what they're saying right now. So it will be a significant impact on the output from agriculture. As it relates to the food security element, we're dialoguing with the farmers very, very closely so that the staples that are in a chain for livestock production, such as corn and soybean, that if required, we will import. They will be given an opportunity to import, the mills in particular. But we are looking at that closely too. Of course, once you go to imports, it's to ensure that we can turn on and turn off the tap as required. So we're doing it in close dialogue with the farmers.
And go ahead.
How does the ministry at the, how do I say, at the ground level, so to speak, respond to this kind of situation in terms of interfacing with farmers and trying to get an understanding and overall appreciation of how they are affected by it, and perhaps what can be done to either mitigate or directly respond to this event?
Well, we have our extension officer, or officers who are on the ground. They would usually go out to the fields, have these dialogue with these farmers. They have been trained in some of the practices, irrigation per se, looking at better varieties for planting. And that dialogue that they have with these farmers, we expect that the farmer themselves will start adapting to some of the techniques that is being taught to them by the extension officers. And some of them have, but there are others who takes a little bit longer because one, of finance. Finance is something that is required whenever you talk about adaptation. And two, at times, the business as usual scenario, they just, for some reason, some of them take longer to adapt to the changes than others. But on the ground, we have our extension officers out there who has gained prior knowledge and have disseminated this information out there.
And I think the response did not start with this event. I'm told by one of the farmers that's been in the business for quite some time that the last time we had it so severe was in 1975, I believe. Wow. But we've had periods, you will recall 2013, 2014, first a lot of rain and then drought.
Yeah.
We look at policy responses to try to alleviate, try to encourage investments in water management, exemptions on irrigation equipment, etc. But coming out of that too, we had also done work with the International Fund for Agriculture Development, and out of that came a program that was launched last year called Resilient Rural Belize, looking at the program to provide technical advice and funding to 23 communities in the country, specifically aimed at climate resilience, to help the farmers adapt to the challenges from climate change. And it's a full spectrum program, all the way from infrastructure to investment at the agronomic level, to training in better business practices, and of course marketing.
And agro-processing.
I wanted to touch on the issue of the irrigation though, because in any conversation with a farmer, the first thing they'll tell you is that it is just too expensive for them to invest in irrigation. What have been your efforts in being able to perhaps alleviate this burden? You spoke of tax exemptions. Is that still not enough for them to be able to make the investment?
I don't think it's a question of it being too expensive. It is something that they must afford. If you're going to continue in the business of agriculture, it is a must. And that is why we're helping the small farmers at this point in time to invest under the IRB, so that indeed they can mitigate the problems. We cannot continue depending on rain-fed agriculture. That is obvious. So it's not a question of it's too expensive. It's you invest in irrigation and you could provide stable, or the alternative would be crop insurance, which is that now is unaffordable. We've had so many work done trying to look at a cost-effective way of commercial crop insurance, and it's not affordable. So the best way is to mitigate it. We're there to help them with that. As it relates to even post-damage, we're working, still early days, but we're working to try and see if we can develop a disaster recovery fund for the sector. We believe it's absolutely necessary given the challenges going forward.
Talk to us about the effects of irrigation if not done properly. How does that affect the environment or the arable land around?
Okay, whenever we talk about irrigation, the first thing we need to realize is that irrigation is the application of water to the root zone of the plant. And it is required so that your plant require enough water at various stages of the crop. If you listen to the farmers who were interviewed the last time, they were saying that we were expecting rain and the rain didn't come.
Yeah.
And if you look at their corns, the grain filling was very poor. You had specks of corn all over the place within the cob. So then the water is required at specific time during specific period of the crop. At the initial stage, at the mid, and during your grain filling. So irrigation in that sense is required, and whenever you look at our potential, so to speak, our soil structure plays a very important role whenever we talk about irrigation, because different soil structure have different water holding capacity.
Yeah.
So you might irrigate in, let's say, Orange Walk a particular period of time, but down south the same amount of water is not required because of different soil structure. So all of these things we need to bear in mind. It's not just buying your irrigation by walls and connecting it and start irrigating. Right? So these are things that is being taught by our extension officers to the farmers.
So and we know that in Orange Walk the soil is more clay and limestone.
Limestone, exactly.
Which is already very dry.
And then sometimes we need to realize that there's also the what we call the burn sclerosis from the excess limestone that affects the leaf. So all of those things we need to bear in mind. And like we usually say, agriculture is a very risky business. Because at times it's water, sometimes it's little water, too much water, pests, diseases. And at the end of the crop, you might plant 1 acre and just harvest probably half acre based on all the different parameters that you need to encounter during the entire crop season.
So what I hear from you is, for the longest time, traditionally, farmers have been relying on Mother Nature to keep her cycling gear. And things have been changing. There was the access to the fund that you spoke about for irrigation investment. So what is the hesitation? If it's not, it is costly, but it has to be done. What is the hesitation that you find, and how are you helping, whether it's in education or increased access?
I think there is two things. There is the agronomic bit, and there's also the business environment bit. First and foremost, the ministry continues to advocate that as it relates to investment in agriculture, the investors, the farmers, should be taxed at the point of production, not at the point of inputs. Because as you can see, this is not bringing in a shoe, a markup, and you put it on a shelf, and within X period of time it's sold at a profit. You might invest, you might lose everything. So we really need a change in the business environment for the farmers to be able to thrive. In addition to that, on the other end, in the event of disasters, to have a fund. What we're thinking right now is a co-contributory scheme. The World Bank doing some work with us, but you talk about reluctance. Getting the IFIs to agree to this sort of a program is not that easy, because they're very much trying to push you along the lines of traditional commercial risk insurance.
What's IFIs?
The international financial institutions. They're pushing you towards commercial risk insurance, which is very expensive, and in the Belize context, quite frankly, unaffordable at this point in time. Also, the issue of markets, balancing the markets, the issue of financing the investment. Several lending institutions, DFC being one of the lead, have actually started identifying specific funding lines for climate adaptation. So we're moving along. We've also done some work with the World Bank on that, on financing climate change. They brought an expert here about a year or two ago met with all the financial institutions to try to advocate that, look, in helping the farmer to invest in the mitigation, you're actually mitigating your risk as a lending institution. So we've been doing quite a bit of work in this respect, but sometimes the adaptation is a little bit slow.
And in your current talks with financial institutions, is there any hope for reprieve for the farmers who do have debts that they have to pay back at this point?
We've not started the dialogue for this cycle as yet, but I can assure you we will. What we've been doing is that we report directly to the central bank to suggest to them what we believe could help. The central bank with the ministry would more than likely then convene a meeting with those institutions and probably even some of the impacted farmers to see what best could be done. That advocacy will occur as soon as we finish our preliminary, but recall it's preliminary at this point in time, so that we can begin identifying those that would require that help.
Tell me all the factors that you'll be looking at when you do your damage assessment, because loss of crop is only one.
Well, whenever we do the damage assessment, we look at the crops, we look at the production forecast. That production forecast is very important. And at the end of the day, especially as it relates to cattle production, we need to look at the calving rate, because these animals would have provided X amount of animal if this wouldn't have occurred. And also, as the C.E.O. mentioned, the pasture, the replenishment of the pasture. So these are things that we have to look at whenever we look at the assessment in its
So the cattle industry takes a huge hit as a result of a drought?
A drought as well. They also suffer as
That's
well.
because of their food supply? Is that the case?
Exactly. Remember that we have certain farmers who do have improved pasture. Those are the ones that they actually buy the seeds and plant. But then there are others who actually have our regular grass that grows in the actual pasture, and they are the ones who are taking the blunt of the hit right now. And if the pasture is not there, then what happens to the animal loses weight. It doesn't reproduce within the correct time. So all of these are challenges that are being faced out there within the cattle industry.
And at an interesting time, because we've been working to try to export.
Yes. There's two things. One, I wanted to mention that at Central Farm and at U Creek, we intend to implement what's called silver pastoral systems, which seem to, well, the experts say are far more sustainable means of cattle production. So we'll be looking at that to run so that we can then lead by example. But as it relates to, yes, we have been pushing for market access for cattle. As a matter of fact, last week, Minister Holtz led a delegation, both Minister Holtz and Minister Pat led a delegation to meet with the Minister of Sader, the Agriculture Minister in Mexico. You will recall that 5 years ago we started this cattle sweep to test the health of the herd. It's gone through the 5 cycles, 3 paid for by a program with the EU, FAO, the Mexican government, and the government of Belize, and then the last 2 by the industry itself. I'm happy to say that we've concluded the 5 sweeps. Our system that we've developed is second to none in the region. Actually, we have a complete sanitary system. Even Mexico and the US and other large countries don't have such a system. We have a traceability system in place. Of course, then the Belize animal is in demand because we know the agriculture help. We also have the challenges now with the trade between Mexico and Guatemala. So we went up to Mexico City to meet with the minister. We had a very, very good reception from him, both as it relates to changing some of the rules to allow us to export cattle for fattening. At the moment, we have access for animals going up directly for slaughter. It will take a few more, probably another month or 2, to finish the, as they call it, the hoja de requisitos, the import information. But we're assured that will be put in place. So from a market perspective, we will be way ahead of ourselves. From the ability to supply, that's what we're paying very keen attention to, because we believe that this drought, especially for those farmers with unimproved pastures, it will be a challenging time.
So you may have been advocating for something that we will not be able to supply due to the drought?
But the changes that we'd be getting from the Mexicans would be long term. So whether maybe we don't benefit from it this cycle, but in the future the farmers certainly will.
Yeah. As representatives of the agricultural sector, given the fact that you're saying the farmers indicate they've not seen this level of dry since the 70s, what concerns you the most? When you look long term as to the implications, what really worries you?
Sustainability of the sector. I've had the opportunity to visit the Texas Panhandle, for example, to see exactly how agriculture should not be done. We have an opportunity to ensure that we come up with a sector that's far more sustainable going forward, but also too, it's the business environment for the investment to occur. I still believe our business environment is not as conducive as it should be towards agriculture. Government has been doing quite a bit to reform in that respect, but there's always more things to do.
But what about the business sector? What about the business environment?
The business environment, as I was alluding to earlier, taxes, the ability to
taxing before production, that was one you identified.
Yeah. The ability to have cheaper financing for the sort of mitigation investments, such as with irrigation and other mitigation efforts. As I said, DFC and one or two of the commercial institutions have actually started looking at it. Government is doing it with this RRB project. That will be $40 million going into the sector over 5 years. So we're beginning to line up the ducks.
Yeah.
Of course, then it's a question of good agricultural practices at the farm level. Dr. Vic and the team at the ministry pushing that very, very hard. So we are working, but the business environment, the agronomic environment, and of course too, it's the question of balancing imports. That's an ongoing difficulty we have.
Yeah.
There's a global problem right now where agricultural products, food products being dumped on unsuspecting countries. We've had a few cases here in Belize where we've rejected ham and some other things that are products that have been rejected elsewhere. We have to step up our vigilance. As a matter of fact, when we were in Mexico last week, we were looking at the Mexican system for agriculture health and intelligence. There's a regional effort right now with Mexico and Orissa and others to put out regional alerts when products are actually rejected. So the agriculture health aspect, both the food coming in, but also to the suspect commodities coming in. We really need to maintain that vigilance and have the support and understanding, especially from the importing private sector. While it might seem like a deal for them, it may very well be extremely damaging to our own domestic production.
So this dumping, as you mentioned, of produce that has been rejected elsewhere is based on expiration or poor quality, or what are the factors involved?
Some of it is poor quality. We had a celebrated case with hams a couple of years ago. The product had been rejected in Ecuador, sat in Panama for about a year and a half in Cooler, and then it ends up here in Belize. We have products right now coming in from areas that are actually banned. Capra beetle, one impacting, could impact grains, for example. We have to ensure that containers coming from those countries are not allowed, product coming from those countries are not allowed in. The biggest one that we have right now, and a severe challenge for the sector, is tropical race for bananas, Panama disease. That was detected in Colombia. We have ongoing discussions at the regional level on that, but it's things that you would not suspect. For example, it's a soil-based disease, so things like used tires. we cannot be allowing from countries that have raised 4.
Yeah.
We really need to have better cooperation from the non-agricultural private sector in that respect.
Yeah.
Both from the food importers, but also too from those commodities that non-agricultural that could pose a threat to the
Yeah,
sector.
or behavior also can cause problems. We saw that with the medfly, people attempting to take things out of
Precisely.
the south.
Exactly.
Precisely.
But that's under control now, you said.
Yes, again, a couple of weeks ago, we met Mexico, Belize, Guatemala, the US. There's a regional effort in that respect, and the outbreaks have been severe in other countries. We had our outbreaks, but because of quick action, they were able to contain. There's ongoing issues in some of the other countries right now.
Yeah.
But again, the weather has been ideal for that, and it's created some difficulty. The weather conditions coupled with illegal contraband trade, and I'm sure you're aware that the outbreaks happen mainly in the Placencia area.
Yeah.
You will recall in 2013 when we had to
And
quarantine
the
the south.
border with Guatemala in Toledo.
But when we had to quarantine the south, it had come in through Halacte. We've put up a station there, so we don't have that same route of infection now. What we see on the coastline, and the last outbreak happened mainly in Placencia.
And that's because they're boats that go out to Honduras.
Right.
Exactly.
Okay. There's just one thing that I wanted to cover before we start to wrap up, because I hear you speaking of the need for perhaps policy changes or a proper strategizing as to what we can do to ensure the survival of our agricultural sector. For a very long time, we were mostly reliant on our agricultural sector. Now, clearly, tourism is our greatest income earner, but agriculture is still extremely important. We're talking about climate change. We're talking about issues impacting the country that we never foresaw. We didn't know sargassum would come and impact our beaches the way it did. We didn't know that the droughts would be as severe as they are now. Looking long term, it is extremely crucial that we maintain this sector because it's a lot more reliable. What are some of the immediate changes that need to take place from a policy level that you've been advocating for? Or perhaps a partnership that needs to be established with the agricultural sector itself? Tell me what needs to happen so we can start making the move towards ensuring sustainability.
A lot has changed. We have a very strong dialogue with the private sector. A lot of the decisions that we take are done in direct consultation and collaboration with them. So we have that linkage, which probably in the past has not been as robust. So we have a very good dialogue with them. The question is investments right now. Knowing what to do, investing to address the issues. Dr. Vic mentioned the issue of the quality of data.
Yeah.
I've been on the show before advocating what we're doing with the census, the georeferencing of the farms, and our BEAMS, or Agriculture Information Management System. It is all, we're doing quite a lot of the foundation work. If I'm to be, things that probably should have been done 15 years ago or 20 years ago, but we're doing them now so that we have proper data to take proper decisions. We've been taking decisions on guesstimates. Now with the systems that we're building, and such as BEAMS and others, we should be able to take proper decisions based on hard evidence. Confidence. Look, I'm very confident that the sector will weather the drought that we're having. We have very long-term plans. I know we won't have time to get into that, but doing a LIDAR survey of the country, we're waiting on climate change in a climate 5Cs to get their equipment properly calibrated, and we hope to do an entire topographic survey of the country, so that Dr. Vic can then put his expertise along with others to deal with surface water collection,
We're
etc.
looking at a national irrigation and drainage plan. That's a long-term plan that we're We're actually, we started in March of this year. We're hoping to complete it by March of next year.
And so this is one of the times where food security and even water security is perhaps a bit more realistic. It hits close to home to people versus all the other times that we talk about it. Can you tell the public what they can expect will be different about production from agriculture this time?
Vegetable production, for example, we're hoping to take vegetable production undercover, fully undercover. There's the IRB program, there's a Caribbean Development Fund program, actually that should be signed on Wednesday, I think it is, to try to assist farmers to take vegetable production fully underground. It helps with less chemical use, but also in terms of producing year-round. So we are taking quite a bit, quite a few steps to mitigate that. That's vegetable. The issue with crops and it's mainly irrigation, proper irrigation, but also to water supply. The whole issue, again, it comes back to the topographic map. They're able to use computer models that already exist, modeling that already exists to determine where is the best place to do surface water collection because it works out a bit cheaper. So we're doing quite a bit to mitigate the risks involved. And as I said, the other key critical issue is agriculture health. We have a continuing, but that's been the case, we have a continuing battle to ensure that the agriculture health remains robust.
All right. Well, thank you for coming in. I know there's a lot more to discuss, but we wanted to get an update as to what the current situation is with the ongoing drought. And hopefully, when we do have the rains and you finished your assessment, we can have a follow-up.
We certainly will, and we certainly, a message to the farmers that we are working with them. We've already touched base with a few of the community leaders to say that we will be convening probably the first week of September to dialogue with them to see, to define the next steps going forward.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank
We're going
you.
to go ahead and take a break. When we come back, we'll be finding out more about Mandarin classes in Belize. So please stay tuned.